Welcome to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast, where we sit down with the people who give shape, texture, and voice to life on the North Fork of Long Island. Some are rooted here by generations, others arrive by chance or choice, but all carry with them a piece of the story. We talk about what's changing, what's worth holding on to, and the currents of history, both quiet and loud, that run through this place. I'm your host, Christopher Bianchi, and for episode 168, we sit down with Kate Stevens, candidate for Fishers Island Town Justice and Southold Town Board. In our conversation, Kate talks about her connection to Fishers Island and how it has influenced her approach to community involvement and leadership. With a background in architecture and education, she brings a practical and informed perspective to local issues. We discuss her decision to move to the island full-time, her work with the Henry L. Ferguson Museum, her role as chair of Fishers Island Waste Management District, and her participation in land use and sustainability planning. She also shares insights on civic engagement, preservation, and her vision for the island's future. So I hope you enjoy episode 168 with Kate Stevens. This episode was recorded August 15th, 2025. Thank you so much for coming on the Floyd Memorial Library podcast today. It's really great to have you on today.
I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks for this great project you're doing for the community. It's
Thank
great.
you. And so in the beginning, I'd like to just start off. You have some deep ties to Fishers Island. Can you share a bit about your family's history with the island and your connection to the community?
Yeah, my ties to Fishers Island go back to my early childhood in the 1970s. My grandparents bought a house on Fishers Island and invited, there's 7 kids and families to come and visit. So it was a sort of a rambunctious group of cousins and dogs and people gathering there as a place of vacation and occasionally some, Thanksgiving, Easter, things like that. So originally it was really family focused. And then, so that was my main connection to the island was through family and through vacationing, and seasonally, really mostly. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that certainly impacted, how I saw the island. When you go there just seasonally, you are focused on a lot of families that go out there kind of have this kind of somewhat insular bubble around them and their extended families. But there are actually some seasonal people who get very involved in community outreach. And I just wasn't in one of those families at that point. But one of the things that can happen as a seasonal person is you become very attached through sort of nostalgia to things never changing. Mm-hmm. And I think when I became a year-rounder, my focus completely changed to be from inward looking, gathering of familiar people into outreach and community focus. And I sort of became one of those people who from seasonal to year rounder, I've sort of called a hybrid. There's sort of this third class of person on Fishers Island. I don't know if it's the same out here, yes. But that's an interesting place to be because you have both perspectives. You have the perspective of someone who sort of wants things to always be the same, and then you also have the perspective of people who want things to work and want a more supportive environment for their year-round experience. Mm-hmm. So, sort of bridging two worlds. Yes,
but so you were summering out there throughout your childhood.
Yes. And then once I became sort of more of a young adult or like went into college, obviously I wasn't doing summer vacations out there anymore. It was more like maybe go for a long weekend, maybe go for, everyone's getting together for Thanksgiving. And it is a bit frozen in time, right? So there's this real continuity. The same ferry is running now as ran when I was a kid, the same benches and everything. So there is this sort of sense of it always being the same, which has a very strong kind of home connective feeling. For sure. Yeah.
And were there any activities that you would enjoy doing when you would go out every summer? And
I mean, I have to say it was pretty boring. I mean, I was not into organized sports. I was an athlete, but I didn't, go off and do things like lessons or something. I was mostly hanging out with my cousins. We would get on bikes and ride to the beach, or we would play ping pong. I think we watched a Betamax version tape of Caddyshack. Could quote it. So there's a certain amount of just being a kid and reading books and going to the beach. And going to what is now the center of my community, which is the west end of the island, where, the market is and the post office and all of that. That's where I live now. I walk right to work. I walk around. It's very much a village vibe. That was just the place that we came to buy groceries. It was there's an east end of the island, which is technically a gated community, and it has much more of a suburban feel. It was designed to be a park originally, so to have sort of houses in a very green space environment. So when you kind of all gather there at cousins in this house and you don't have a driver's license, you're on bikes. And and that was actually pre-bike path. There's now a bike path, which was developed to some controversy, which connects the east and the west end of the island. So you can now sort of safely, along this asphalt path, kind of traverse the whole, had that been in place when I was a kid, I would have been, all over the place. But that wasn't there. So there was a certain amount of sort of like, well, here we are, guys. We're going to play cards. We're going to go to the beach. We're going to go out and climb on the rocks. So, yeah.
And also, before moving to Fisher's Island full-time, you have a background in architecture and education. Can you talk about how those fields interested you?
Yeah, well, I got actually into architecture through my initial love was nature, being outside. And, we would go visit my grandparents in New York, and I would sing, "I hate New York" on my way in, because I just wasn't a city person. But I got to spend some time actually on a junior project when I was in high school, living with a family in Paris. And I was really into photography at the time. I had an old Pentax 1000. And I would go to this school. It was the École Catholique des Jeunes Filles, which is, like a Catholic school for young girls in the morning. And the teacher would be up on a platform. And anyway, and you would be taking notes with rulers and pens and stuff. So I had that experience in the morning. And then my afternoons were free. So I would wander around the city taking pictures. And I was actually using slide film. And so when I went back and did my, slide carousel presentation to the rest of my classmates after the project, I realized I had fallen in love with the city, and I had fallen in love with the structure of the city, the patterns of the city, and it just opened my eyes up to that the human-made environment can be as beautiful and moving and inspiring as the natural world. And that kind of got me shifted, and I ended up studying architecture in college and working for a design-build architect. And the field really impacted me in terms of giving me a lot of skills that I use a lot, which I could talk about later. And I suppose I will also say I double majored in literature. Books were an escape for me, as they were for many kids. I consider myself an introvert, and it was, a place where I could find companionship for sure. And I just kept that up and just read throughout college and wrote about Virginia Woolf. Actually, architecture space in the writings of Virginia Woolf was my senior thesis. And I sort of kept those in parallel. And then sort of as life, you kind of move through life, I had a practicing architecture chapter. And then, which involved living in Vermont, living in Philadelphia. And then I met my now husband when I bought a place in South Philly and sort of made the decision to move with him to abroad. And that got me into teaching English because it was an obvious skill to learn and that I could obviously share when I got there. And so I'd done some teaching at Temple. I've been teaching architecture, and I actually did some teaching in Philly to prepare. I worked for Drexel University and also for a nonprofit for immigrants in South Philadelphia to get prepared. And then when I went overseas, I ended up living in rural Italy and teaching at a science high school. So I taught English and then actually ultimately geography as well in the English language. So it was a content language integrated learning, a CLIL program, after school program for really highly motivated kids and highly motivated parents. And that also gave me a lot of great skills too in kind of sort of reaching out, connecting people, kind of activating their curiosity. So those are those two experiences.
Yes. And I guess we might be jumping a bit, but
jumping's good.
when what made you decide to move to Fisher's Island full time?
Yeah.
after doing all those, working in those different fields?
Well, before I decided to move there full time, I decided to kind of create a base there. It was actually leading up to the 2016 election. I was out there visiting family, and I saw a house. My mom and I said, let's go look at this house. And we started fantasizing about what if. And then I was back in Italy, and I actually was visiting. I worked on a group of volunteers for the Women's March in Rome. And I'd actually been doing it remotely, and I went in to meet them in person because I'd actually come back to the States for the Women's March in DC. So I'd done all this organizing for the Women's March in Rome, and I was like, see ya, I'm going to go back and kind of be with family and friends for that experience in the US, which was amazing. And of course, the organization Women's March in Rome kept going, and I subsequently worked on additional projects with them. But in any case, I went to Rome to meet these fellow organizers for the first time. Got in the Pantheon, which is my absolute most favorite building in the world, this incredible oculus, and it was like being in this enormous shell, and I swear to God, it was like I heard the Atlantic Ocean. That's what I heard. It was like, I wasn't like I hear ocean sounds, I heard the Atlantic, and it was like a homing beacon went off. Mm-hmm. And I wrote my mom an email when I got home, and what about that house? And she said, I'm thinking about that house. And so we bought a house together, and we conceived of it as kind of a family place. And then COVID hit, in 2020, so about 3 years later. And I felt, obviously I'd already kind of created this place and had this strong sense, but because there were also some issues of vulnerability with my mom and stepdad and their own transitions, I was like, I got to get back there as soon as I can. Mm-hmm. So June of 2020, as soon as I could get from my region to the airport, I hopped on a flight and we moved in together on Fisher's Island for about 6 months, which was pretty intense. Mm-hmm. And then when everything normalized, I didn't want to go back to that abroad life. I really felt like I'm home, mm-hmm. and it felt really natural to kind of just let those roots sink in and figure out how I could get more involved. And I'd sort of been missing that sense of belonging, honestly, mm-hmm. being abroad. So
yes,
yeah.
And coming back at that time, did you think? Because you probably had been visiting Fisher's Island here and there, but just seeing it from when you were a child to it changed. Had it changed a lot at that point, or you just felt like it was home now at that point?
Well, I think a lot of people go, I don't think there was anything about Fisher's Island that changed that made it feel like home. Okay. I think it was about me and my journey sort of around the bases of life that made it feel like home, where had definitely been this sort of stable, central, unfixed point in a life that had a bunch mm-hmm. of different chapters, living in different zip codes. Mm-hmm. So it had that continuity to it, and it had that really strong sense of family to it, mm-hmm. which when you are living, a 7-hour flight from family and something like COVID happens, it brings up, a sense of what's important in a very clarifying way. So I think it was more that I transformed in terms of what I valued. I wasn't so much seeking these experiences in unfamiliar places to learn and acquire skills. I had sort of reached a stage where I was like, how can I give back? My dad had passed away in 2014. Mm-hmm. So those things reframe things for you. Mm-hmm. So I think that things had gradually reframed where it just sort of fell into place that this is how I can use what I've been learning in a way that's going to be helpful. And that felt and still feels like the most important thing and like a privilege to be able to find that.
Yes. And also just moving back at that time, you mentioned you started to get involved in the community there. Was the Henry L. Ferguson Museum one of the earlier places you started getting involved in?
Yeah, it was. I think my first project there was as a volunteer. I read something about them looking for volunteers to help with some beach leaf disease had arrived on the island, and these beautiful groves of trees are just majestic that are right along one of the trails. And I immediately, said, how can I help there? So I showed up and started helping doing the survey work, and then recruiting more volunteers for that. And then eventually kind of them, saying, well, why don't you start sort of volunteering. Why don't we start, paying you to do some of this stuff? So it sort of evolved into me doing other projects as well. But that was sort of the through thread, was kind of then developing a process for over 250 trees. How are we going to treat them? How are we going to do this in a way that uses time wisely? So developing a system for that and tagging all the trees. And we do it twice a year, every year. So I think we're on our third year. So that's sort of how I kind of got my foot in the door with that organization, was just sort of volunteering to help. And then it just evolved from there. Yeah.
And in terms of the museum, it plays an important role in preserving Fisher's Island's history and environment. You eventually moved up to the head of the museum. What do you hope to accomplish in your leadership role in that museum?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm filling a very important role within the recently completed strategic plan of the museum, which doesn't really have me as the head. I'm technically the executive director, but there's a president. And then there's also museum director Pierce Rafferty, so President Elizabeth McCants, and then a great board of about 20 people. So I'm part of a team, really, and I'm sort of a new layer that's been added to the team. Where sort of our museum director Pierce Rafferty is this incredible. You would call him like a national treasure. He's like a Fisher's Island treasure. If you've never spoken with him, you've got to talk to him. You should interview him. Yes. He is just got to just fire hose you with information about every nook and cranny about the island history. But he sort of had become over the years a one-man band. Just had more and more things added to his plate. So because I'm good at forging partnerships, I'm good at working in teams, and I'm also kind of like to kind of go in and figure out systems for things. It was sort of a really good fit to say, okay, we want strategic plan identified. We need sort of this layer of staffing, which is going to relieve. So the museum director can focus on the archives, the collection, the program. The land trust manager and coordinator can focus on all things relating to our almost 400 acres of land that the museum owns or has easements for. And then we also have a seagrass coordinator. So those are kind of the next layer of people who are actually doing stuff. And so I'm sort of in this administrative position, helping them all do their stuff, basically. Yeah. So, and my idea for what I see being helpful is just kind of looking at the backlog of things that have just sort of accrued kind of with a bigger vision of how can we make this easier? Much like, how can we make treating 250 beech trees easier? Like, how can we streamline some of this stuff? How can we make sure the right people are included and we're not redundantly asking 5 people to do the same thing? And just sort of working gradually, obviously, to make it easier for people to focus on the things they're great at.
Yes. And you're also the current chair of the Fisher's Island Waste Management District.
I am.
You've been involved in major decisions about the island's future. What have been some of the most rewarding aspects of this work, and what challenges have you faced in that position?
Yeah, so I can start more with the challenges. It's the first time I'd been on a board before. I didn't really know what that would be like or what that meant. And now I'm coming to realize that every board is different, right? It's just a constellation of human beings trying to do stuff. And so they're more or less functional and more or less collaborative. I entered into a board that was not working well together. And that was a big challenge. There was real disparity of a mission in the board, which led to some stalemates. So the initial challenges were kind of figuring out how can we figure out a process of working together, of voting on things, of moving things along. So that was the initial challenge. And then I think that the initial rewards were that actually working, like actually becoming more of a collaborative team. We had some turnover, we had some change of people who were involved. And so it started to get easier to do stuff. And then things became more rewarding because we could do things like hire a new manager. We could also pick some low-hanging fruit, ideas that have been around for a long time that had been tried or explored but not quite gotten off the ground. Like we'd piloted a food scraps to compost program, but we didn't really have widespread in participation. Sort of taking that on, figuring out, okay, we got to get these 7-gallon green buckets. We've got to, put out these cards. We've got to get this compost consultant. So things like that were very rewarding, seeing how we basically went from like less than 2,000 pounds of food scraps collected a year to over 16,000. So that was a concrete result. And then things like, I'm calling them land recycling projects. So we are actually, Fisher's Island Waste Management is a special tax district of the town of Southold, but we actually own our own properties. The town doesn't own them, that we are on the title. So that's a big responsibility, actually. So one of the projects, which we might talk about more later, but is this solar field. And we had this capped landfill that was just kind of sitting there. And there'd been these ideas to have solar field there for a long time, but they never quite made it. So we finally formalized an RFP process, got it out there. And it's now, there's a lease, the developers in their sort of feasibility planning stage, and, trying to get some zoning changes and working on an off-taker agreement with a local utility company. So it's moving forward. Still not done yet. Still got a long way to go. It could still not happen, but at least it's sort of moving forward. And then another project that's been rewarding is one of our sites is connected to the sort of what would be the kind of the western coast of Fisher's Island. You think of it as only having a north and south coast, but there is sort of this section that faces out towards Long Island Sound that was closed to the public. It was just part of our overgrown, some old fort structures. And there'd been an idea for a long time to lease that to an organization on the island to create a path. So this was before I was working. I was still volunteering for the museum. We leased it to the museum to develop it as a path. And then since I've been working for the museum, we were able to coordinate with adjacent property owners, which include the Fisher's Island Ferry District, the Fisher's Island Conservancy, and a couple that owns an old fort building there, to allow us to put a public path right along the coastline. So that's now, we just had the opening for that last weekend, and it's a real example of partnership, kind of jumping over your own shadows, siloed organizations working together. So that sort of all started by being on this commission, so that's incredibly rewarding, because you're not just, your key mission is obviously, you're an island, you have to figure out what you can divert and keep on island as a resource, and then what you've got to just ship off the island. But in addition to that, we also needed to find out how to really manage our land properly. So,
yes.
Yeah, that's been a really interesting position. I've learned so much.
Yes. And is that something with being on that board, trying to be more self-sufficient as an island with waste management? And, you mentioned the Pickett landfill for possible solar development, but even just with waste and how that works on the island.
Yeah, absolutely. It is such a factor of energy and just cost and time to move material on and off the island. So any place where we can, the New York State DEC is, their new kind of management plan motto is building the circular economy. Is sort of never thinking of waste. Basically eliminating waste from our vocabulary. Everything's a resource. Yes. It's just a resource looking for a home. And so, we've been focused on that. Mostly, we've been most successful with our organic material. So none of that's going off island. It's not getting burned. It's either being, logs are being turned into firewood, which we give away to community members, because there's actually a fair amount of people who heat with wood in the winter in the year-round community. And then brush is getting turned into mulch, which either is sold for mulch, it's free for pickup, but if we have to use our machines to load it, we sell it for a certain amount, or it gets added to our food scraps to create our compost. So, and then food scraps are being diverted from household trash into and separated and ultimately making this sort of black gold compost. But the benefit of that also is we're not shipping off, well, we still are to a certain extent, but it's much less that the trucks on the ferry are not oozing, wet garbage. It's, things are drier than they used to be, and it's going to a waste to energy plant in Lisbon, Connecticut. And obviously, if you send wet stuff there, it's not as efficient for their equipment. So it's sort of just across the entire kind of chain, diverting materials, keeping it on island, it benefits everyone. Yeah. We did experiment we do a lot of pilot studies on the island, and one pilot project was to purchase, with a previous commission, was to purchase a glass crusher, because that was identified as, wow, we could, instead of shipping all this glass off, we could crush it and make this beautiful aggregate. Contractors could mix it into their concrete. People could make countertops. They could use it as decorative mulch. And I think it was a problem in retrospective scale. Like, we didn't buy a good enough one. We didn't spend enough money. So it ended up that like an employee had to hand feed it, bottle by bottle.
Yeah.
And then we also discovered that, oh my God, it actually produces maybe some dangerous dust. So that didn't work out.
Okay.
But it was in a similar philosophy as how can we keep this on island?
Yes. Before we get to running for town board, you've been involved in the Fishers Island zoning committee. Also, can you talk a little bit about your involvement in that? And
yeah, I mean, I was thrilled to be asked to help out with that. Because of my background in architecture, but because of my interest in land use already on the island, and because we haven't even broached the topic yet, but on Fishers Island, as on the rest of the North Fork, severe housing shortage. So this idea that, maybe we can actually look at this and make a difference, I jumped at it. And then sort of my role on the committee was kind of the document geek, so I went like on the laserfish site of the town and went down rabbit holes trying to find everything I could about prior. Of course, I read the Southold Town Comprehensive Plan, but then put all this in Google Docs for the committee, but then also found, going back into the 1980s, there was a really interesting study for Fishers Island done in combination with the Trust for Public Lands. And they had amazing data about the shift of home ownership from year-round to seasonal, and school attendance, the number of students per class, just painting a picture of depopulation and a shift from a thriving seasonal community to a more of a resort seasonal community. And they also mapped a lot of the communities. Anyway, the point is I grabbed all this kind of information going back to the 1980s and up more recently, and was able to identify some really clear common priorities in the community, which then synced up really actually completely with macro categories of like whatever they are, the 13 main kind of priorities of the Southold Town Comprehensive Plan. So those are basically affordable housing, thriving local business, protecting open space, and protecting island character. So so my role in the committee was like, having geeked out on that and presented it to everyone and put it up on slides, and was to then sort of make sure we are always holding that kind of as our litmus test in anything we talked about. And then I got really involved with the actual encapsulating the work into maps that we shared as a zoning ideas document with the town planners and the consultants. Yes.
And then from there, you're involved in a lot of things right on Shelter Island now, but
on Fishers Island.
I mean, on Fishers Island, sorry.
Yeah.
What made you decide to run for the town council?
Yeah. I think maybe it just sort of this contagion of helping and wanting to, and working on projects and seeing how they could be applied elsewhere, and how resources elsewhere could be applied to Fishers Island. Particularly, getting involved in something like the zoning committee and finding this laserfish site and realizing that there's a whole folder on Fishers Island, and not many people on Fishers Island realize that, there's all this stuff that's held there, and that that's a minor example. There's just seems like an opportunity missed for connectivity and synergies. And so I suppose I felt like, well, I can advocate for that. And I could talk about the food scrap program, or we also have we have a nonprofit housing organization on the island that people on Southold Town look to as an example. So there's certain things that we've done kind of at a much smaller scale, because we're sort of this tiny community that's very self-reliant, that is willing to try things that could be helpful for the rest of Southold Town. And then we also have some major issues. While we are very self-reliant and we tend to pass the hat rather than ask for help from the government when we need something as a community. We have, like a lot of other communities, creaking infrastructure, this like 100-year-old systems that need, a total overhaul. And that is just totally out of scale for us to be able to collect internally. So I'm also thought to myself, well, maybe there are resources out there at the town level, at the county level, or even at the state level for infrastructure, for open space protection, for housing, maybe there's help out there. So I got interested. How could I figure out how to connect those two?
Yes. And in terms of some of the more pressing issues facing Fisher's Island, what do you think what would be your top priority? Would it be housing or?
This is such an impossible question because they're so interrelated. I mean, It's sort of like, the macro category would be there's a real hunger for a more resilient year-round community. The year-round community feels a little bit like we're sort of got a lighthouse keeper mentality. You're kind of keeping the lights on, but
everyone else is gone.
Everyone else is gone. And that's not to say, it's not totally like that, but there is this aspect of deficit that could be, we don't have a year-round cafe, for example. So, the only place you can see people, unless you're going to someone's house for dinner, you see them when you're out on a walk is, driving in your car and waving is the post office, the market, the freight building. So we don't have like a third space. We don't have any restaurants. We don't have any cafes in the winter. Those are all just like Memorial Day to Labor Day businesses for the most part. So that's a real lack. So that would be kind of a micro thing. But I would say that building a resilient, sustainable community would mean sort of housing for people to live in and making sure people are making a good wage, because the cost of living issue that everyone's facing, you have to have enough income, and then, and your housing can't be so expensive so you can actually make it work. So and I think that also applies out here. But I would say one thing that is not the same is Fisher's Island is basically which is a pressing issue if you live there year round, is we're in a jurisdictional limbo. Because, we're technically part of New York State, but we're served from mainland Connecticut. So just think of healthcare. Like if you're in the marketplace, you are out of network if you're going to a doctor in mainland Connecticut. But to see a doctor in New York, you'd have to take 2 ferries, 3 hours, and $180 round trip to go see that doctor. You'd have to take your whole day. And so that's a real problem. If you're on Medicare, it works perfectly. We should all be on Medicare, but we're not. So that's a real problem. DMV is the same issue, and there's been an effort to create sort of an offsite DMV at our community center, which may or may not come back to life. And some of that stuff you can do online now. But so those and I suppose not really jurisdictional, but we are also experiencing a massive wave of homeowners insurance being canceled. Because of, superstorms and climate change. So, and I don't know if that's happening out here or not, but I would imagine since it's a similar climate with similar storms and similar issues. So those are pressing issues, these sort of legal and jurisdictional issues. And I guess another layer I would add on top of that is governance, because I mentioned that we are very self-reliant, and there is really not really a sense so much of being part of Southold town on Fisher's Island. We rarely see our representatives. So hopefully that'll change. Hopefully the town board will start coming to our island community board meetings, zooming in, and hopefully people, it'd be great if we had a ferry that would once a month or every quarter go straight back and forth, and people could experience, see what their town hall actually is. Go, who is this planner? Who is this town attorney? Check out the festivals. There's I think a missed opportunity, because culturally we're very similar, but it's like it's just also such world apart.
Yes.
So a pressing issue would be governance, because I think there isn't really an appreciation of the strengths of being part of the town of Southold, and so that's a pressing issue. Because if you don't have a sense of that, you're not going to take advantage of it. You're not going to, So I sort of stretching back from housing, cafe, housing, jurisdiction, and governance. That's my one pressing issue.
No, and I think, like you said, there are a lot of overlapping issues within Southold on the mainland here. But there are some unique issues, right?
Yeah.
On Fisher's Island
Yeah.
that I think they do. I think the town does the one
They did.
trip a
Just did
year,
it.
but it would be nice to have more. And I know because we had Justice Evans
Yeah.
on, and
Oh, great.
she talked about having how she has to get over here and all the
Yeah.
it's a challenge, and that would be there should be some more thought put into that, I think,
Yeah.
moving forward.
Yeah. There's a kinship, that we should
Yes.
foster for sure.
Yes.
I think for to benefit of both.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then so you also have, just looking at your experience both in education and architecture, how do you think these fields shape your perspective on community development and historical preservation on Fisher's Island?
Well, I don't know. At the risk of giving a long-winded answer, I would just say that I think architecture has given me a real grasp of process. Any field that you're in, it can give you sort of a language set. It can give you a perspective of looking at the world. And I think when it's studying architecture, practicing architecture really drives it home that everything in our human-made world is a result of a design process. There was a concept, it was developed, it was prototyped, it was tested more or less. And then whatever the decided kind of best result was realized, maybe adapt over time. But that sort of flow, which is open and closed and you have to be flexible and, is something I'm very comfortable with and is completely applicable in my work at the museum. At Waste Management would certainly influence my work on the town council, developing policy. And I would say that from the teaching point of view, teaching sort of architecture taught me that everything is a result of creativity and the design process. And teaching taught me that everyone is creative and that it's really participation that is the trigger for learning. I think that's why you get 2 grades in a lot of classes, one for the content and one for your classroom participation, because it creates this, they even say it opens up, there's something in your brain that opens up, makes you more receptive when you relax. And I think participation and play get there. And that's a part of the public process. It's also a part of my work in the museum, team building, but figuring out how to reach out to people, make them feel engaged and have them feel encouraged to participate, allows things to flow in a direction that ends up in a good result. So that works across organizations at the museum or in partnerships with Waste Management. And I think also for town council, all these different layers of community, whether it's civic associations or individuals or chambers of commerce or, just kind of figuring out ways to engage people so they become shareholders in what's happening. It's when you're on the sidelines, kind of throwing pot shots that things get, but if you're in that constructive, trying to find a solution frame of mind, then, things move forward.
Yes. Oh, I was curious with the mainland over here, what your thoughts are on the community over here. I don't want to switch it too much from Fisher's Island, but
yeah. And now for yeah,
just I haven't been to Fisher's Island, but
you gotta come visit.
I know I gotta make it over there. But just even your thoughts on being over here, what you think of the community over here, and some of the, like you said, seeing some of the similar issues, whether preservation or housing.
Yeah.
Just your thoughts on the area here.
Yeah. Issue-wise, there's so many parallels. We're these sort of crenellated sort of peninsula island or end of an island, so we've got all these waterways. We've got a, narrow bit of land in the middle. So there's all these climate adaptation issues. There's all this open space versus houses issues. And I think originally I had this sense that sort of Southold town on the mainland was sort of more of a monolith, and we were sort of this one-off. But as I've spent time out here, it's really clear that we're not a one-off at all. We're just part of a necklace of hamlets and an incorporated village that all have really strong sense of identity and community internally, that are all part of Southold town. So in a way, it's just sort of more of the same. It's like, we're more of the scale of Laurel. We're not like, Fisher's Island is not Greenport. We only have 250 people a year round. We have about 3,000 in the summer peak. So, so we're more rural and we have much fewer services. But So I will say out here, I guess I was surprised by the similarities. And I thought there would be more difference. I thought it would seem more, kind of like on, the big town on the big island, but it's not. It's a collection of small communities that share resources and that are or they're not really small communities, but yeah, these hamlets and the village that all kind of, and yet work together. And I think there is, I'm trying to think of what else I've observed. There's just so much the same, the water, the focus on the water, and appreciation. I think that both places are hugely benefit from having this water edge, because we can't just sort of dissipate into sort of an endless suburban thing, so we have almost like a walled town or something like that. Like there is an edge and we have to always be aware of that edge. And that has kind of forced us, I think, to constantly negotiate that edge and make decisions about land use that relate to that. So that's another thing I find similar. And then, people here are just incredibly friendly. People have been so kind. I've gone to a bunch of events. I went to the 60th anniversary of CAST recently and was so moved by that organization, by the building they occupy, by all their programming, but just sort of this sense of positivity, of neighbors helping neighbors, and that felt really good. We don't have anything obviously of that scale, but that's like a example of something I would love to see kind of like pollinate back on Fisher's Island. We don't have a food bank, we don't have their certain things. So I think I'm sort of here. I feel like I'm on a constant research mission when I'm here. Like, oh, that's a good idea. We should do that.
Yes. And just looking at Fisher's Island, just in the future, you're working within the history area with the museum there.
It's not just history. It's
okay.
Yeah. So it's really natural history, and also land. And we have a land trust. That's a huge component. Yep. Yeah. So conservation of land is a key part of our mission, and education and outreach.
Okay.
Yep.
But just balancing the island's heritage while also planning for its future growth as well as sustainability. What do you think moving forward, how to balance that, whether you're talking about housing for the community out there or preserving the land and balancing that? Yeah,
I feel like that's maybe a false dichotomy, that they are two sides of the same coin. That we should settle and reinforce the existing hamlet centers with infill, adaptive reuse. We should definitely not spread out on any more open space. And if anything, is there a potential retreat? Are there some opportunities for retreat in certain areas, particularly on the coastal vulnerable edges? But I think keeping open space open, we don't even need to talk about why that's important. But there's just from agriculture to habitat to, climate, resilience. There's so many reasons why that's how we should be occupying the land. And there's so many reasons why we should be reinforcing our centers that already exist, because that's what we like. We like to walk around. We like to be seen. We like to see other people. We don't like to drive our car from like one, big box store to another. We like to, generally it's more enjoyable to park your car, get up and walk around, and hang out. And that's what people are drawn to. That's why this is such a strong place for tourists to come, because there already is that sense of place that makes people want to get out and look in a window and maybe grab a bite to eat. And so by just reinforcing those, the thing that already is working that people are drawn to. So where should we be putting more housing? We should be finding opportunities in existing buildings and opportunities to infill in and around existing buildings. It sounds like an easy answer. The devil is in the details. And it's not something that's just sort of like a one size fits all. It's, I think, there'll probably over time be a series of pilot projects where a vocabulary will build up. Oh, that's that garage turned into an apartment kind of thing. And that's that adding, a second story to that building. And so there's sort of ways, and that's that taking that old, bank building and using it for something else. And then there's that empty lot or that really deep lot, and there's an infill building there. So, and you see communities making that transition to greater density. And I think that there's that can cause fear in people, except when people realize that that's actually what they're drawn to, that's like where they're going to places that are like that.
Yes.
So I actually use Greenport as an example on Fisher's Island when we talk about kind of some sites within the kind of existing village part of Fisher's Island. And people are like, oh, well, that's going to be, well, yes. I mean, it is closer. Your neighbor is closer than they were before. But look at a place like Greenport, that's where people are living side by side. And, you have the sidewalk and you have the yard and you have that, it's not like we all need to have this cone of silence around us.
No, not everyone has to have these big
yes.
plots of land and bigger houses.
Yeah.
But
it's the American psyche, perhaps.
Yes. And even just the car, dependent on cars and everything, which out here, especially on Fisher's Island, it'd be nice to have more transportation, like you said, directly here. But for the mainland here, having the train service more frequent and buses, it would be better in terms of traffic. And I'm sure, well, would you say the traffic there, does it double in the summertime?
It's
or is it
really hard to say traffic and take yourself seriously on Fisher's Island. I mean, I know it's a big issue out here with these, these 2-lane roads and, and things happening at each end. So there's a built-in, the commute. So there's a built-in crush of people trying to get to the same place at the same time. And the only thing, we have kind of two types of traffic on Fisher's Island. There's the ferry traffic, which you have here, and people getting on and off the ferry. And then there's also, I think, probably you shouldn't even use this term, but what's called the trade parade, right? Sort of the trucks moving.
Yes.
So we have both those sort of flows, but it's just not a big deal. It's not like you're ever like tapping your watch. I mean, we have.
You're not hearing people.
No, we don't have a traffic light on Fisher's Island. I think we have four stop signs. We don't have very many stop signs either. It's just not that big.
Yes, but it seems like it's more the resources are the main focus for Fisher's Island. What the town can do to provide more services and
yeah. I mean, I'm not sure that that's even a consensus. I think that's sort of an opportunity that I'm seeing that I want to bring to people's awareness is let's explore this, let's see what's out there. Let's make those calls. Let's ask those questions. I think that there's still a very self-reliant, we've got this sort of frame of mind. But I think the main struggles are for year-round people are kind of access to basic services, making that easier, and having enough. And having a place to live. It's incredibly stressful if you're in a living situation. Let's say you're in a marriage or a partnership that doesn't work out. You may end up, homeless. Like you maybe not be able to stay on the island because there's no inventory. So it's sort of a game of chess, and sometimes, someone will move out of one house, because they don't need all the bedrooms anymore. And then someone else will move in with a family. So it's just sort of, there's this, but it's housing is a finite resource there. So I think that's a big pressure for sure. And I think for the seasonal community, I mean, that's a year-round thing. And it impacts the seasonal community, too, because it impacts the institutions on the island and the kind of, are there going to be people, I mean, I know many people have mentioned this already, but our volunteer fire department is, I think the average age is over 50, and certainly doesn't get the type of demands that the fire department gets here. I was talking to someone the other day who said there were 5 calls that day or something. So luckily, most of the calls out there are false alarms. We do now have a full-time paramedic out there. But this sort of human infrastructure that protects people's houses, even if they're not there year round, having, someone who's going to, having a paramedic team, the EMT team that training is so intensive. And we do have a bunch, but we just, it's like, it's such a commitment, and we don't have a huge number of people. So it ends up that the same people are on the volunteer fire department on 2 or 3 boards, are running a major business. So it's like the burnout level is pretty high.
Yes.
So a little more housing for a few more people, and not just a little more housing. I mean, enough housing to support both the year-round people who want to live there and support this human infrastructure, the staff for the key anchor institutions like the museum, the library, the conservancy, the various places that Lighthouse Works was an artist in residency program. All those people, when they need to recruit new people, a place to live becomes a reason not to take the job. So that combined with also the seasonal activities, like whatever, the different clubs and things like that, they need just a huge flood of people to staff kitchens and do and run programs. And so we need sort of seasonal housing for those people too. So yes. So I think maybe if you're looking for a common theme, I think it probably is the housing element, because that impacts everyone. Mm-hmm. But I will say that it does raise a level of fear, turning back to our first question about that seasonal frame of mind of not wanting to see a blade of grass changed. Mm. So it's like, you need more housing, but then there's a certain contingent that may not want to see the housing.
Yes.
So that's something we've got to work out.
Yeah, that's the same here, I think.
Yeah.
And also in terms of for the young community growing up there, and what about for schooling, and how does that work on Fisher's Island?
Yeah. I mean, when you asked a little bit about one of the most pressing issues, and I kind of gave you that long list, I could have added school to that as well, because I would say there is a good school there. It's a K-12 school. Mm-hmm. I can't remember. I think there are like 60 or 65 students total. Mm-hmm. Half of those are coming from Connecticut. So from the Connecticut side, it's a charter school. Mm. And New York side, it's a public school. And those students coming from Connecticut have a very long day. They're there, they're on the 7 o'clock ferry coming out, and they're going back on the 4:40. So they're getting back. Their parents are picking them up in New London at 5:30. So 7 to 5:30. And I will say that it seems like, and this is one of these low-hanging fruit ideas, an idea that's been around for a long time that has a lot of community support, and maybe will come out of a new strategic plan process the school is just about to launch, is this idea of the school, rather than having a generic academic curriculum, might have a more place-based academic curriculum, mm-hmm. and could even be, something in the model of like the New York Harbor School, which mm-hmm. is both a college and a career prep high school, where where the mission is that the idea is you graduate with a job offer letter mm-hmm. and a letter of acceptance to a college, mm-hmm. that you have both, you have options, and you have skills to fall back on. So I think that would be something that would infuse a huge amount of energy into the school, because I think it would really attract people to it. This idea mm-hmm. of a hands-on learning, maybe even that has a curriculum that's focusing on sort of maritime sciences, biology, environmental studies. Mm-hmm. We wouldn't really necessarily have a farming component there, but something on the mm-hmm. North Fork certainly could or would. Mm-hmm. But we do have one oyster farm. But I think that focus on the environment and studying the environment and careers around the environment could be a really strong and a hands-on, particularly in this day and age of AI, mm-hmm. where there's a passivity and sort of almost a disconnect from our bodies, mm-hmm. and that idea about learning being about participation and needing to really engage. Mm-hmm. And also certain people learn by doing, other people are learning more auditory, more visual, but there's also that kinesthetic learning. So I think all those things, it would be so exciting if the school became this, kind of pilot example of a multiple layered approach to education, where you're doing the regular academic stuff, but you're also getting this out in the world hands-on. And we could also use the rest of the island as part of the campus. We have these people, these incredible, as I mentioned, Pierce Rafferty at the museum, and really great people at the library. And Lighthouse Works is always bringing in artists in residence on a 6-week rotation, who often do projects with the school. So there's a lot of human capital mm-hmm. that could also be better incorporated in the school. Mm-hmm. So I think that'd be really exciting.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And now we've talked a little bit about what you've done throughout your career. You've worn many hats, from architect to educator, museum leader, public servant. Is there a moment in your journey that helped clarify your purpose, or showed you that this path of community work was truly yours?
I think I experienced a certain major shift when I was doing my teacher training in New York mm-hmm. City. I did a boot camp, 1 month thing called the CELTA certificate, where you start teaching basically the first afternoon, and you have lessons in the morning with a group of 12 people, and then in the afternoon you teach kind of a group of volunteers who are coming in. And I think I switched from the I hate New York to I was staying with my brother in Brooklyn, and I was going in to sort of lower Manhattan on the subway. And just that exposure to teaching and that sort of shift of curiosity and how to get people engaged and participate. I just started riding the subway differently. I just started getting more interested in the people around me, from an introvert to just more curious. And I suppose that kind of opening up to people from things, from designing spaces for people, obviously interacting with people. It's not like it's a hermit, but just this curiosity about what motivates people, how to engage people, felt like this is something important happening. And then I will say that when I was living in Italy, I kind of missed that. I mean, I got it in teaching, but I definitely missed that sense of creating belonging through actively participating in your community, because unless I'd been born there, I was never really going to belong. And that's just part of the culture as well. And probably part of why when I returned to Fisher's Island during COVID, I just felt sort of this incredible like release and sinking into something like an old pair of shoes, like this feels comfortable. So I think that transition and then, just bit by bit, I suppose each thing I did that was more about solving a problem that helped more people. It wasn't just this discrete design problem for this private thing or even like a university. It was like, oh, this is going to actually help a lot of people. That becomes, I think, a little bit addictive.
Yes. And I think just lastly, you've kind of mentioned what you enjoy about Fisher's Island, and some of the issues that you want to focus on but what would you hope to see for Fisher's Island down the line? What would you hope to see in the future?
I think I'd like to see more lights on, not this 80% empty home situation. I'd like to see people gathering outside a coffee shop all times of year, laughing and just interacting. I guess I'd just like to see, in a way, it's a little surreal. In the summer, I think there was a period of time in like the 50s and 60s when there were about 600, 700 people on the island. And it was able to sustain a restaurant or maybe two, and, various other services that have now disappeared. But in the summer, when you get these, up to 3,000 people there, it's sort of like this bizarre alternative reality, like, oh, this place can have that many people here. And, and there are all these events happening. And then there's the kind of, so it almost oscillates annually from, a populated to a depopulated place, in the way that some communities were populated in one period of time and eventually became depopulated. Fisher's Island is alternating, swinging. So I guess my hope would be that there was less of a swing, that there would be more, certainly not balance. There will always be more people coming out there in the summer, but that there is enough of a sense of solidarity and just connection and just enough human beings that all those things can happen. You're not talking about overdevelopment. I think we're talking about just enough kind of services and places to live that people can actually, have a good quality of life and enjoy spending time together, actually using the softball field, for a couple of teams again.
Yes.
That was something that happened before. Now there's sort of one big game a year.
Yes.
So.
No, and then was there any last minute things you'd like to say or discuss that we haven't touched on?
I suppose I haven't mentioned how generous people are there. I mean, I think, I've sort of maybe described there this difference between being there as a seasonal person and as a year-round person. But the point is that everyone loves the island and shares this love of the island. And that whether you're there year-round or you're there seasonally, there's an enormous amount of generosity. They're pitching in with time or pitching in with helping support organizations. And I think there is for all that I've talked about, the community needs more support, there is currently a strong sense of community. I mean, if there was a water break on Christmas Eve, And we all knew who was in the hole fixing the water. We knew their name. We knew who it was, So there's a lack of anonymity. There's a familiarity on the island that I just want to make sure I get across, that it's a real strength, that people know each other, people appreciate each other, people can have different points of view, but there's generally kind of a sense of we're in this together for the most part. I would say maybe I'm being a little Pollyanna. And I think that self-reliance piece too is tied in with that generosity, that the willingness of people on the island to try something. It's like, it's almost like you would think, well, people are so like, it's, so addicted to things being the way they are, they never want to try anything, but that's actually not the case. It's sort of this interesting scale, which I guess I have mentioned, that people are willing to explore and try something. And sort of with the spirit of, okay, if it doesn't work, we're not like stuck with it. We'll just try something else.
Yeah.
So I think that's pretty great. Often you think that can only happen in like a company or with a group, but this sort of to happen at the scale of a community and have different organizations who are all have a bit of an experimental frame of mind, I think is very healthy.
Yes. No, definitely. I think all communities could use more of that type of environment and open to try new things.
Yeah.
No, but I want to thank you so much for taking the time to come on the podcast today and share your story and career and all the work you're doing on Fisher's Island, which is really important. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me. It's been really fun talking with you.
Thank you. Well, I hope you enjoyed episode 168 with Kate Stevens. I want to thank you for listening to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast, and we'll see you next time.